brief about quick brief about Dr. Ayushman Bhagat. I think the brief that was shared with us also talks a lot about him and what he is. Basically, he is currently the postdoc fellow at Tel Aviv. It's a university in Israel. He has done his PhD in human geography from Durham University, UK. And besides that, he has 9 years of work experience in the area of human trafficking, forced labor, as well as in migration. And he has worked with some of international organizations as well as NGOs. So he has both the grassroots experience as well as when he was working with the ILO and other international organizations, he did have the experience of working in the area of public policy as well. And I think over to you, Ayushman, from here. Thank you.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm extremely grateful that I've been given this amazing opportunity to present my PhD research and basically to present on a topic that frustrates me and excites me at the same time a lot in front of an audience which specializes in public policy. I mean, though I have worked a little bit on public policy, but I'm not at all an expert. So, I mean, I'll be really happy to, hear your comments and suggestions on how I can proceed my scholarship, and especially on this particular thing, which is quite critical. Now, what I'm going to do in this particular presentation is I will actually take you through human trafficking field. Okay, yeah. So what I will do is I will first talk about, what are the debates of human trafficking, because I mean, calling trafficking and as borders means that I'm challenging literally third biggest crime in the world. This is how like majority of the policymakers talk about trafficking. So in order to do that, first I will take you through, the history of human trafficking and the movement that started in Europe and, how it progresses and where it is actually at the moment. Now I will talk about, after that, I'll talk in very brief about how this particular, field of study or, field of development as well intersect with borders, and you'll be very surprised to know that very few critical border scholars has worked on human trafficking. So, I mean, the paper that I'm working on is Trafficking Borders, and it basically brings two very, very critical scholarships together. Now, what allowed me to do this is a participatory action research that I conducted in Nepal, and I'll elaborate it at length. And then I will talk about how I'm trying to conceptualize, on the basis of the findings that I have got in the field, how I'm trying to conceptualize trafficking borders. So basically, I'm a geographer and we try to map the world. I'm a human geographer and we try to map social world. And this is one of the ways of, conceptualizing from the ground, kind of a grounded theory, but I mean, it's coming from participatory research. So let's start with the debate of human trafficking. Now, in order to tell you about the debate of human trafficking, first I would like to talk a little bit about the term which is called as fallen, which was known as fallen woman. It's a Victorian term, fallen woman, which was assigned to women who used to have sex before and beyond marriage. Now, over the period of time, this particular term evolved, and women who used to work as sex worker or prostitutes were assigned that particular term, and they were marginalized from the society at that time. And it was 1800s, something like that. It was this particular thing was happening. Now, after that, during 1870s or 1880s, there were reports of British women working in Belgian brothels or German brothels or French brothels. And this particular thing created a huge uproar in the then, Great Britain. People were really obsessed at that time to protect women. And what happened was majority of the egalitarian people and majority of the religious people, those people who were who used to support evangelical church movement and all over there, they collaborated and they started a massive protest in England. You will not believe that during those times, there used to be silent movements, silent movies and all, and people were talking about sex work, prostitution, how women were like enslaved in brothels and all, and how it was the moral responsibility of the state to protect these women and bring like to their families and prosecute those people who facilitate these movements as traffickers. Now the problem was, though the movement was very strong, we really do not have much data that how many women were working. Of course, there were women who were working in brothels in like different parts of Europe, but we really didn't have data. Now, one of the movement got its strength because of the migration that was happening at that time. Because at that time, industrial revolution was at its peak, and majority of the people, especially like Eastern European people, were coming to like spaces like West Germany and England and all. And it was the narrative of trafficking made it very easy for the state to, blame on, like, for example, Russian Jews who were like fleeing prosecution, or maybe people from Romania and all. So basically the trafficking narrative was feeding into the narrative of xenophobia. It was feeding into the narrative of, like abolition of sex work, and it created quite a lot of uproar. So the first time the world received the word traffic in women was in 1907, when UK tried to pass an act which couldn't pass due to several reasons. But in states there was the similar act which was called as Munn's Act, which was passed. Now, according to the act, the trafficking was focused only on sex work. So there were people, who considered sex work as the most problematic thing, and they think that we really need to like free literally all women working in sex industry. This means that you are trying to talk about like abolition of one particular industry, and these people I call it, this is my terminology that I have like devised, that these people are endists. They want to end human trafficking by saying that there should not be any sex work. Now, what happened over the period of time? This evolved, and people started questioning about the right of those women who used to work over there, like in sex industry and all. So people said that, okay, we'll not like criminalize women, we'll not like abolish sex work. Of course, the hidden agenda is to abolish sex work, but they said that, okay, what we'll do is we'll penalize those people who buy sex. So basically, they are planning to they penalize, not planning to. In many countries, the law is like this, that they penalize those men who buy sex. So this basically creates a dominant paradigm of human trafficking, which relies on criminal justice approach. And there are people who, like Kevin Bales, he thinks that it should be part of new slavery, because things are changing a lot, and they believe that we need to rescue, we need to raid all those places, like where women are like stuck, and we need to save them. Now, you would be surprised that after First World War, everybody stopped talking about human trafficking because migration stopped. Now, during 1970s, when so many things were happening, like Germany revoked its guest workers scheme, and then over the period of time, like Bosnia-Herzegovina happened, the structural adjustment programs failed in Africa, and meltdown happened in Africa, and like migration again started. So in 90s, with the migration came the debate of human trafficking, and you'll not believe that in 10 years, human trafficking was the third biggest crime in the world. Now, during that time, there were like two leading movements started in human trafficking, and these are led by feminist groups. One is called as CATW, and second one is called as GATW. CATW is Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. GATW is General Alliance Against Trafficking in Women. So both are feminist groups, but wherever these people were like meeting to talk about women's rights, they were basically fighting. They were like accusing each other because of the different ideology. One was saying that sex work should not be there. One was saying that no, if you are really interested in like addressing exploitation, talk about exploitation. And exploitation happens literally in every walk of life. Exploitation happens in every labor relations. Women are sexually harassed in every labor relation. People are deceived in every labor relation. So this is what is the understanding of what I call as beyond this. They are actually moving beyond one particular space and time, which label people as trafficked victims. Or they are saying that no, trafficking happens in so many different walks of life. So we really need to talk about this. So there are basically three approaches. which is first is right approach. Of course, where people are talking about women's right of work as working as sex workers and all. Now, the second approach is like a labor approach, which was devised by Professor Hila Shamir, and I'm currently a postdoc under her. And she talks about like big labor market, like structural changes so that people, like it gives protection to temporary migrants and all. And now the third approach, which is very new, which was developed by our own Prabha Koteshwaran, it's called as development approach. It's also like a very new framework of, development, which is not like proper development, which talks about like big struggle of people, peace and struggle, history, post-colonialism, and all. So many things are happening in here. So these are the approach that they take. Now, what happened during 2000 when these people were fighting in literally these people means GATW and CATW representatives, they're fighting in literally every United Nations, meetings and all. And UN came up with the first legal definition of human trafficking in 2000. Now, imagine the debate started like 150 years ago, and the first legal definition, because nobody knew what trafficking was because of the different ideology and all. So the first time the definition of trafficking was given to us by the United Nations, and these two people came together, like CATW representatives and GATW, and they came up with this particular super big definition. So basically, in order to simplify this definition, I would say that there are basically three things happening here. Act is recruitment, transportation, receipt, and harboring of a person, and then means, and then purpose exploitation. So what they did was they didn't define exploitation. So I'm sure you know that when in law, if you do not define anything, it may and keep it vague, then things would be extremely complicated. So I mean, it's now more than 20 years, and you will be surprised to know that just because of this like super complicated and weird kind of definition, we really do not have much prosecutions of it. We really do not know how to properly identify victims of human trafficking. And if you're not able to do that, chances are very high that your interventions could be counterproductive. But this is what some of us like critical anti-trafficking scholars like collateral damage, that this particular definition enables. Now, two parallel things happened at the same time. Not at the same time, one parallel thing happened at the same time, and then another, of course, I'll talk about forced labor. This is ILO's point of trafficking, on trafficking. So first was United Nations Domestic Act, Trafficking Victim Protection Act. So what it does is it creates its own act, and it categorizes country into 3 tiers. It's called in its annual trafficking in persons report. Now, if the country is not following United Nations definition, it is placed under 3 tier. The third tier, if the country is trying to follow, but it's not able to do it because of the monetary constraints and all, it's placed under like tier 2, sometimes under tier 2 watch list. And then those countries who are able to follow literally all parts, definition of United States, then they are placed at tier 1 level. So what this particular domestic law of United States does is it actually positions the United States as a global sheriff to control trafficking. Now, clearly, Palermo Protocol, if country ratifies it, country make laws and all, but there is no legal implications of that. But TVPA is providing a teeth to this particular act, which means that the states is sanctioning funds to poor countries. If they are not following the state's understanding of trafficking, then they will be penalized by organizations like IMF, USAID, and all those organizations. And third is ILO's Forced Labor Convention, which also says that everything is forced labor and trafficking comes under that. So it has its own thing, but of course, over the period of time, ILO has also already shifted its understanding of forced labor, and everything is at the moment merging towards modern slavery. And that has another, that's very different discussion. Now, what brings these two conflicting groups together is basically their area of investment. Basically, the area of investment. But what I mean by area of investment is these people are so much invested towards saving people. You see, so what does that mean is they are highly focused towards labor relations. Now, labor relations happens where? In destination area. Now, one other thing that I say that people, these are people, you are reducing the subjectivity of human being to the subjectivity of a labor relation. And that's why I criticize the whole paradigm of human trafficking as something which has a destination bias. Because if you do not understand, the series of exploitation that people have faced in the past, and you are focusing about one particular instance, then you will create more damage than good. So and majority of the discussions that is there at the moment on trafficking is basically on the immigration regime. Of course, critical scholars are very, very conscious about rights of refugees, rights of immigrants, in all those privileged spaces like the United States and Fortress Europe and all those spaces. But they actually neglect how and why people come to this particular place, these immigration regimes and all. And this is where I position my research. Now, the critique of destination bias is a very sharp critique, and I mean, it's like, I mean, my positionality is not at the moment that I can step on toes of so many people who have worked on this particular script for so long. But I have a very, very valid reason, and I have a very, very strong case study to justify this, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, the second most important thing is, it actually, even if, for example, in this people, they talk about raid and rescue, and beyond this people, they talk about you should give right to sex worker, you should represent, labor who are exploited and all in immigration regime and all. But what I believe is these all, for our paradigm, it actually creates several kind of bordering practices. This is something which is very, very exciting, and I will unpack it more when I talk about borders, that how it creates borders. Now, whatever they do, it actually creates border practice. And this is where I think critical border scholars would be very, very important to bring in, because they have some really important insights on this. Now, bordering scholarship, of course, this is a very, very colonial discipline, I would say. The majority of the people who were there in India, they're geographers, human geographers, and they're expert in creating borders. Now, initially, the whole debate was, how naturalized is the border. They were talking about line of the sand. They have created a line, and actually that creates quite a lot of issues, right? Now, over the period of time, this particular thing has I don't know, nobody talks about line of the sand actually at the moment, because people are talking about, they are saying that borders are basically everywhere. The moment you say the border are lines of the sand, clearly you will not say the border this is produced before and beyond that particular, line. Now, this is basically very, very post-structural insight. And of course, French philosopher Antoine Balibar, he proposed this thesis of the proliferation of border, heterogeneity of border literally everywhere. So what it means is, so there are various kind of border. For example, an immigrant, when he goes or he or she goes to African immigrant, imagine he or she goes to European regimes, then there are so many borders that the person has to go through. And for example, there is this biometric border which actually helps the state to monitor one particular person literally every day and every time. So and of course the border of race, the border of language, the border of ethnicity, culture, so many things people carry with them. So this is a very, very post-structural insight towards border studies, and this is something which is extremely important for us, I believe, to consider here. Now, my problem again with this particular amazing theory of very radical and ethically charged theory of migration is it also has a destination bias, because the majority of the literature that has emerged under critical border studies, especially work of Nicholas D. Genova, Sandro Mazzadra, and all, who talks about autonomy of migration. I believe that autonomy of migration is a brilliant theory, of course, but it has a destination bias. The critical border studies, critical migration studies also has a destination bias, because border is there in the global south as well. These people have not paid so much attention towards that. Now, why I'm saying that this is like there is a destination bias in both the scholarship, critical border studies and critical anti-trafficking studies, is because we really want to access or like provide an accessible social justice to people who are affected by that. Clearly, it's not affected to people who are extremely privileged like us. Maybe not in the way, it affects those people who are classed, race, sex, gender. It affects so many people again, but we don't know about it. So that's why I thought, I should actually bring these two together in this paper. Now, the problem is, this is basically my case study. Now, Nepal is basically a very interesting country where sex work is not allowed inside the territory of Nepal. Women are not allowed to leave for domestic work in the Middle East because of, like the rumor or, because of the like increased exploitation that happens in Middle East and all. So internally, these people are like stopped by the immigration regime, like emigration regime of Nepal. So the state of Nepal doesn't allow its own citizen to move. So majority of the time, what these anti-trafficking scholars or these critical border scholars, they say that state is creating a category of other, and when you create the category of other, it is very easy to dispose them, right? Now, state here in Nepal is not creating the category of other. State here in Nepal is creating a category of native, and it is problematizing the mobility of its own citizens. So this actually case literally asks and demands us to flip the whole theory and come up with something which is extremely grounded and extremely contextual here. So this case is this particular case of Nepal challenges both critical scholarship of anti-trafficking and borders. Now, in order to understand that, I wanted to I thought I should do research on Nepal, but I mean my experience is made mostly in India. So I remember I was sitting in the ILO's office, and then earthquake happened in 2015, and everything shook. And my boss told me that, look, from the next day, you will see people will talk about trafficking a lot, and that exactly happened. So that's why I was not, and when I was implementing ILO's project on trafficking, I was really not sure whether we were wasting money or time, because clearly it's not going to help literally anyone. So I knew from the day one that this is a failure project, and of course, it has been proved that the project didn't do anything. Anyway, so that frustration held me to write a PhD proposal on a big participatory action research, and I was fortunate enough that somebody funded this particular project. So I thought I should do a participatory action research. This is something which is very, very grounded and socially and politically charged research project. Now, what I did was I actually divided the study into 3 phases. Phase 1 was scoping study. Phase 2 was village immersion. Phase 3 was on the move, like mobile or border ethnography. Now, phase 1 was, so this is the total timeline, as you can see, 7.5 months, scoping study, village immersion, planning, and stakeholder, and on the move. Now, what I did in the scoping study was I actually didn't select the community. So what happens majority of the time when we do social research, especially when we do social sciences, when we just choose a community, either by the literature, either through the literature or through NGOs and all, and we go there and do research. So I thought that, I was the one who was suggesting literature, research at one point, research community at one point in time when I was working as, development professional. I thought there is an inherent bias in the site selection. So in order to counter that, I went to Nepal without any preparation, and then I started to do some sort of dialogic snowballing, and that allowed me to find a site. And it took 1 month, to do this kind of work. And the moment I entered into the community, I saw that the community was totally devastated by the earthquake. I mean, not even a single household was left, in proper condition, after the earthquake. And it was like post-disaster recovery lands in so many ways. So I went there, and people have already told me that do not use the word human trafficking in the community, because use it, chances are very high that it will keep you out. And this is basically a Himalayan community. where what I'm talking about. But fortunately, I was really lucky enough that most of the people knew Hindi. I'll tell you how they knew Hindi in a bit. So, so after scoping a study, I came back, I wrote ethical proposals and all those, like clearance from the department at university. And then again, I went to the this kind of moment I entered into the village, I saw the village is divided, highly politically divided. And there was this political, Nepal was going through some sort of political shift, and some elections were happening, and nobody was talking to each other, right? So, I mean, I was advised that I should make of course, by the local people, that I should make a community at least, so that you can bring people together. So the first thing that I did in the village was I brought people together. I made a village level committee, and then we discussed in the community that how and why we will, proceed. So we all came to a conclusion that we will try to understand how people move and what are the different challenges and opportunities there in the mobility. This was basically my research. It was not on human trafficking. I was just waiting for people to talk about trafficking rather than I going said, oh, I'm going to do research on trafficking. No, that was not. Now, the committee actually held, so we named it the committee, and we formed subcommittees as well, and they helped me to find an interpreter and peer researcher. So 5 people with 5 different subject positions were chosen to do this kind of research. One was, for example, one was like sex worker, one was like an agent, one was somebody who has been to Qatar, one was somebody who has been to Malaysia, and one particular person was somebody who has never migrated. So what these 5 people did was, first I interviewed these people, and then we realized that, there should be a participatory training exercise. So, we like booked the place, and then we went outside the community, and for 2.5 days, we were like learning from each other, and these people told me literally everything about the village. What are the problems, what are the challenges, what are the challenges that they face in the past, what are the challenges we're facing in the future, and how they should start, conducting the research. So we planned that there should be a safe space in the community where we can come together at every, in every week, and we can reflect on our actions. So this is something which is key to participatory action research. You act and then you reflect. You act and then you reflect. This is called as ethics of reflexivity. And this came from the community, and then these 5 peer researchers, they made their own focus group, and then we started having focus group discussions with literally all, and so many things came up. And then finally, we decided to interview people, right? When we were interviewing people, we were actually generating like mobility routes and all, and we were discussing it, and then we were changing the criteria. Just imagine, one week we were interviewing domestic workers, and people, when we analyze it, they're like, yes, this is it, let's interview sex workers. Then another week we interview sex workers, then another week illegal immigrant, then another week we interview people. So we did so many interviews, and it was a nightmare because this is not how PhD works, but clearly the ethos of participatory action research was to allow people to take charge of this particular process. Now, what happened was, this is something which is extremely important for the conceptualization of trafficking borders. So these, when we were about to finish that, so the whole thing was revolved around construction of migrant resource cell in the community. And I was given, I don't know, 5,000 pounds to do that. Now, unfortunately, some of them started doubting. They said that if you create some sort of information center in the community, chances are very high that people would know that we migrate through illegal channels, and they will not allow us to do that. The moment the state knows that something weird is happening, the state comes and tries to control that particular thing. And illegal movement is a big thing in Nepal. Now, these people do not want it to be re-stigmatized, and they asked me politely that please do not do that. And then, now reflecting on this particular thing, I realized that this is how people subverted the pre-formation of borders. Information, I would have done that. I would have won prizes in Nepal for very sure, because this is something which ILO is trying to do. It's not an IOM organization like IOM is trying to do, but they are not able to succeed in that. But at that moment, it was a nightmare for me to, come out of that particular space. But I mean, looking back, I believe that, people subverted the borders that, that this research would have created. Now, after that, I did mobile ethnography. I actually went to, like, if you can see, on the background, there is like Nepal map, political map. And I went to all these places and observed all these are like Indo-Nepal borders, and people from that particular community, they use these borders for different things. So I did observation. I talked to so many people along the way. And for example, and this is one of the findings that is there. So these are, if you can see the first picture, there are like 3 women sleeping in one small, I don't know, makeshift detention center, I can call it. So these were moving from, Nepal to India to work wherever they wanted to go, but some anti-trafficking organization halted her. So in the second group, you can see the, the interrogation happening. So after this interrogation, this woman is put in this particular place. Now, they are not allowed to move, but majority of the people, Indo-Nepal border is open, but for them it's not. So this is something which is very interesting. And then after once I did that, I did the whole, border ethnography, we can call it, on the move, or mobile ethnography, whatever you want to call it. So I started from the village. This is the only bus which connects village to Kathmandu. They went to Kathmandu. Actually, this is anti-trafficking check desk, help desk, and then they go to Delhi, Majnu Katila, where these people. So these people are from Tibetan origin. They choose Majnu Katila because nobody can identify them, because they actually immerse themselves in that particular place. Then Delhi airport, there used to be a special window, like a special corridor for Nepalese people, And then Colombo airport, I went there, and these 2 women are supposed to like protect people from trafficking. And then finally, I went to Kuwait. And on the basis of this, the whole thing, I generated this much amount of data, mobility stories, interviews, and informal discussions and all. Now, these are the findings that's on the basis of all these things. These are the findings that I've generated. So, I mean, Geeta, how are we doing with time? Is it Geeta, ma'am? How are we doing with time?
1 second. You have another 7 minutes.
Okay, I will wrap it up. Thank you.
Ayushman, you're muted.
Oops, is it better? Is it? I guess.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So yes, I'll talk about one of the findings and then move directly into the conceptualization of trafficking border. So the history of the place is very important. So initially, it's something which is very, very exciting. So initially, women used to go to, like, initially means 200 years ago, women used to go to, like, work as concubines, domestic workers in ports. That process stopped. People started, and Nepalese king flew from Nepal and they went to India, and then they became bankrupt and sold women to brothels. And then over the period of time, these women, among women, started their own brothels in India. If you go to, like, places like Sonagachi and all, you will see that there is like special Nepalese, buildings out there. So, and then these people started coming to their villages to recruit women. And then anti-trafficking movement started in 90s, and the bordering process started happening. And then women thought there's no point in going to sex work anymore. So they started going to Middle East. Thanks to the migration ban, which is there since last 10 years, Nepal government is like facing one ban after the other. So these people started going to, like, Middle East through different channels, you see. But the newer generation is like, there is no point in like wasting time and resource and energy in finding how to escape the route. Now they have started moving to Fortress Europe, to European countries. So I mean, one of the problems that I had was how to like conceptualize, this historical transformation in sector. Clearly, something or the other is happening in between. That's why things are transforming. Now, if and of course, there are people who like hold so many subjectivity at the same time. Like they are victims and they are traffickers, they are illegal, they are irregular, all at the same time. Now, Now, this actually is helping me to like conceptualize uh, borders. Basically, on the basis of the interviews, I found that borders is basically produced at literally all sites where people move. From household, there is a negotiation. People are not allowed to move. Some fights are there. Domestic violence, intimate violence happens in the household because women wants to go through illegal channels. In village, of course, in the community space, nobody will tell you, whether they when and whether they are going, to Middle East through a regular channel, because they know that if they will say that, thanks to anti-trafficking organization and their intervention, chances are very that they might not be. Government office is the same. National highways, as I said, all these anti-trafficking organizations have their stalls in the national highways, and they thoroughly check women's, clothing and their bags, to see whether they are being trafficked or they are going to India properly. Now, of course, there are immigration detention centers on the border, which is something which is super exciting. Internal detention is happening in Nepal, and I don't think there is any place in the world with this particular kind of stuff is happening. Of course, airports, as I showed the checklist, and cities, clearly, like we have seen the billboards in Delhi and other big cities that you have to be vigilant of who is being trafficked or not. And of course, people become sorry agents of trafficking. They are normal people, and all of a sudden they could become agents of trafficking. At the same time, they could become agent of anti-trafficking as well. So this is also something which is very interesting. And all these anti-trafficking practices, on the basis of ethnographic, findings, people suggested that majority of the anti-trafficking of pro-migration activities are anti-migration. In fact, be it awareness generation, be it safe migration training, or of course transit monitoring. Clearly, there is this thing in Nepal that you are not supposed to go to the Middle East, otherwise. Now, this is conceptual framework. I'll skip that. And this is basically something which is very important. This three pillars, my whole, the conceptualization is. So trafficking discourse is a very, very powerful discourse. It brings so many discourse into, different sites in so many different forms. For example, in household, it will bring the discourse of patriarchy. It will bring the discourse of puritanism. It will bring the discourse of development. So many things is combined because of anti-trafficking discourse. And this is what I call a symbiotic power. So, for example, there is this migration ban in Nepal. So anti-trafficking NGOs are implementing these migration bans on national highways or Nepal borders or airports. So this shows that that some public policy, you can say that this particular discourse is anti-trafficking is drawing and capturing into this discourse. And lately, people are trying to talk about the symbiosis of anti-trafficking or modern slavery with climate change as well. So this is a very, very powerful discourse which historically has combined so many discourses. Now, what I'm saying is this particular combination, when it happens, it changes the meaning of borders. So borders, so normal border scholar was like border with the line of the sand. Then over the period of time, they said that no, borders are everywhere. What I am saying is border basically is a very, very contingent thing that is happening in the world. So when a target of the border, moves, then people from different walks of life, they become a bordering agent and they come together to capture that particular target. So this could be people, this could be agent, this could be institution, this could be, some discourse, some practices, segment of states, all come together to control this particular, target of bordering. So this is what it's liminal, because these people do so many different things. Porocratic, sorry, it's not patrocratic, it should be porocratic, because of course there is a porosity in the system and they are creating aggregates, means so many things are combining together and creating certain aggregates. So this is one of the sub-conceptualization under trafficking borders. And of course, I'm talking about porosity of access. So what happens is the subjectivity. And so as a development professional, I place migrants' voice and their perspective in front of literally everything. That could be state, that could be public policy, that could be anti-trafficking intervention, that could be anything. So my theoretical and ethical standpoint is you really cannot capture people's subjectivity through any policies and through any laws. So what happens is when these people move, they always find porosity in the system, irrespective of the fact that how much you can reconfigure. And this porosity like demands rescaling of borders. And it basically is an automation system is happening. People are trying to move, and laws, policies, and all, they are trying to capture this particular movement for good reason. Maybe they're trying to govern it, but it's not happening, and it will never happen. And the discourse of illegality and irregularity will be here, and through this, I am trying to suggest that trafficking is better positioned as a border producing discourse rather than as something which has to do with exploitation, because exploitation, nobody is talking about exploitation, though they are using exploitation to talk about larger politics and so many things, but people are really not interested in that. And one of the collateral damage of trafficking is it actually intersects with human right violations of people, and it doesn't allow people on the move. So with that, I would conclude and summarize my presentation. What I did in this particular presentation is I talked about destination bias and the critical features of trafficking and borders. And then I tried to conceptualize trafficking as border creation narrative. And of course, there is one more conceptualization, which maybe I'll present some other time. The conceptualization of skink mobilities, that is used by people to subvert borders of trafficking. So with that, I will conclude, and I will say thank you. If you want to have any question, you can ask.
Thank you, Ayushman. Thank you for sharing your whole research. I think it was only within 45 minutes to share the whole PhD is also difficult, but it was really insightful. And now it is open for others. Any questions, any discussions, any questions you want to ask, you want to discuss anything? Someone raised.
Sorry.
Vivek wants to ask something. Please, Vivek.
Sure. Hi, I'm Raji. I just have a question to Ayushman. Thank you so much for that insightful topic, and I think it's a very timely research as well. I don't know which time period you conducted this, but this is required in today's world, right? So I just wanted to understand your perspective of, have you seen this study more from an ethnographic perspective? In case you want to extend this further, how much have you seen online discussion, debate? If you would have probably taken this as an ethnography study, how you would have taken this assessment or your thesis, in which direction?
Thank you so much, Rajesh, for asking this particular question. And I think it's an important question. The first thing about timeline, I would like to clarify that this research was conducted from 2017 to 2018. So the field work was conducted during 2017 and 2018, and I completed my PhD this year, I guess, in January. So basically, I was constantly in touch with policymakers of Nepal, and I was also talking with so many people from the ground, because we are connected and we talk on regular basis. So it's basically very updated. Now, yeah, as far as your question on ethnographic perspective is concerned, that correct me if I understood it clearly or not, that you are saying that the online discussion that happened on human trafficking among people, among normal everyday people, or you are talking about online discussions that basically happens to recruit people? What exactly are you talking about?
I'm looking, given that the pandemic, and assuming you would have done it during this pandemic period, using an ethnographic study rather than doing a field study. If you're doing an ethnography study, how you would have approached the same thing?
It could be a nightmare, believe it or not. Because majority of the thing that I have, the majority of the data that I have produced is basically with the community, which would not even allow anti-traffickers to enter inside, their like villages. So clearly, even anti-traffickers are not allowed. So clearly, they are not going to say. And one of the things that I talk about in my methodology is I'm really not sure whether I have collected the right data or not. Believe it or not, because I mean, I really cannot risk, putting people as a very like naive sort of people who talk about literally everything. Clearly it could be a very, very difficult thing to like do these kind of research. But I mean, I can see the point, because majority of the discussion that is happening at the moment in trafficking is the recruitment is basically online, and many girls are being recruited in the sex industry through online channels and all. So I've not thought of that, but maybe definitely in the future I will think a bit more about it. And if you have insights, please share it with me.
No, thank you so much. As I said, as a father for 2 children, while I feel safe growing them up in Singapore, my daughter 13, my son 8 years old, it always sends tremor in my spine, thinking about what if, I'm an Indian, born, grown up there. It always sends tremor, how do you bring them up? Because people do talk about on the online social platform for a spike movement, whether it is a Me Too movement. You go to a couple of forums out there which do talk about it for a spike period, but you don't see a corrective action being taken. So this kind of a study, I'm sure, is quite encouraging, at least for the governmental bodies to take the right action.
Well, yeah, you are right. But I mean, how shall I put it? I mean, these kind of there are a lot to assume in these studies. I mean, of course, NGOs talk about what you are saying. There are so many NGOs, UN bodies, they talk about it all the time. But I mean, conducting this could be so much challenging, because like we are accessing people's private data. I mean, and the whole debate of privacy, the whole debate of trust will come into the picture, and all those sort of. So I mean, I don't know at the moment. Sorry, like I really don't know. Maybe I have to look at it. Who are doing research on this particular topic, but I'm sure there are people who are doing research on this.
No, thank you so much. Because the reason I kind of led to the ethnography is I know a friend of mine who is doing a study on dark web and talks about how dark web is being used for child trafficking. So he's more into SOC security operation centers. That's where this interest came from. But thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you so much. Please connect me with your friend.
Sure, sure.
Happy to have it.
Will do. Thanks, ma'am.
Professor Vivek, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Ayushman. I'm a faculty at JSGP. My question is, what evidence do we have on impact of decriminalizing sex work on trafficking, both in terms of the place of origin as well as a place of destination?
Decriminalizing sex work, trafficking, destination, origin. Yeah, this is a very, very, very broad question. Thank you so much for asking this question. Decriminalization, and I believe the answer could be extremely contextual. You see, so of course there are countries like Amsterdam, like Netherlands and all, where there is one specific model of sex work which is there out there, and people say that that this has improved the condition of women. Of course, because they are part of union and they pay taxes and all. But of course, there are some really, really critical studies which say that no, it has not increased, like it has not done anything. Of course, women are all like trafficked to sex industry in Amsterdam and other places. Now, then on the other hand, then there is the Swedish model, where women are like sex work is banned, everything is it's basically criminalized and all. So of course people say that even this is not working. So and these are critical scholars which like draw upon sex work and critical anti-trafficking studies and all. So they say that it's very, very contextual, I mean, overall, I mean, if I can make like sweeping statements by saying that, decriminalizing sex work actually improves the condition of sex work, which could be true but up to an extent, you see. But I mean, when you talk about trafficking, I mean, there are research which shows that still trafficking happens in sex work, and where decriminalization has already happened, right? But what I am trying to say that if you are not like doing decriminalization, you see, it is not going to improve. It is not going to do anything, because I mean clearly the condition is really, really bad. It's there, and sex work. If you're not decriminalizing it, chances are very high that you are advocating about criminalizing sex workers. And of course, there are countries where sex work is criminalized. For example, Nepal, where sex work could potentially be criminalized, you see, if they're not able to prove the evidence that they are being trafficked and all. And there are so many European countries where this particular thing happens. So one of the arguments that we are trying to talk here is I mean, we really need to move beyond criminalization and legalization of sex work, or decriminalization of sex work, because I mean I can understand that the whole debate of human trafficking started from sex work, but for example, I mean what my project investigator Professor Shamir says that it should be understood, trafficking should be understood through broader labor paradigm, because there are so many sectors like domestic work, construction, agriculture, that these things happen. Does that answer your question, or I'm just doubling?
Yeah, to some extent. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Do we have any other questions?
I don't see anyone raising hand or any question. So,
now, can I ask a question?
yes, sir.
Yeah. Ayushman, thank you very much. It was very interesting. I listened very carefully. You talk of different academic stands, approaches, labor and development, Kotishwaran and your current collaborator focusing on labor issues. I wondered if you have some thoughts on perceptions on the part of, say, government and civil society and donor groups. I ask because in matters like this, for instance, I did a fair amount of work in Afghanistan, and the entire donor community with respect to traditional institutions like the Jirga or the Shura would get divided. Different donor groups would support different kinds of NGOs with a different ideological stance. So I wondered if you have some insights on that kind of thing, because a lot of this is driven in a way by those, on the one hand, governments and what they say or think, and then by international donor agencies who support civil society groups in many countries, which and these groups are committed to protecting women and, if you like, described as anti-trafficking groups. But what they do is often influenced by ideological standpoints of donors. And there isn't there's a multiplicity of viewpoints, I think. So I just wondered if you have some reflections on that whole world, which is not academic. The academic perception is of a different kind. And academic differences of the kind that you talked about are legitimate, and we can reason about it. But I'm wondering about the extraordinary influence that donor groups have, and including some organizations of the United Nations.
Absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, thank you so much. Sir. This is actually a very, very, very important question, and I reflect about it a lot because I started as a practitioner. As I started as an anti-trafficker, if I use that word. And I completely agree with what you are saying, that these decisions of whom to give fund or not is basically based on ideology. See? Now, when I was presenting initially about the history of trafficking, I presented two basically, ideologically different standpoints. One is like against sex work, it's like Puritanian based, and all those sort of stuff. And the second is like pro-sex workers, okay? From like Thailand-based organization, which is called as KW. Now, majority, the whole world actually is, like have adopted, the anti-sex work model due to obvious reasons. See? Now, the problem here is the majority of the funding that comes through that particular channel, that those who are subscribing to that particular ideology, is basically through religious organizations, basically through the United States, because US aid is literally totally against sex work. So this feeds into very, very larger agenda of like a world without sex work and a world without so now, but of course on the other hand, there are donors who are like quite critical about the whole thing that is there out there, like for example DFID and all. They fund like GATW. Of course they fund both, but majority of the fund goes towards GATW and all. And there are so many like Andheri Hilfe and so many foundations which actually channelize their fund towards the cause of social justice, because they think that rights of sex workers is important. Now, having said that, things are moving fastly towards modern slavery debate. Like everything is like subsuming under the whole bracket, like big bracket umbrella of modern slavery. Now, what this particular terminology does is it actually again creates different faction groups. And you'll be surprised to know that the majority of the world uses modern slavery as a rhetoric. But in the UK, there is a law. In Australia, there is a law, and that's it. Now, Australia has a big AHRC fund, the Australian development something. So they fund towards modern. So what they are doing, if they are funding towards human trafficking NGOs, they say that now you have to use modern slavery, you see. Now, there are so many Indian organizations who have gotten fund from DFID, and DFID has DFID means like UK Department for Development. Now UK has this broad agenda of modern slavery, which is percolate, like this is and I'm talking here about like in geopolitical scale, because I mean the whole agenda is basically to like establish the debate of modern slavery among those countries where we are not having this particular debate, and the money flow is so high that or even organizations like the ILO, who used to have like forced labor, the whole bracket thing that I talked about, which say that under forced labor, so many things come like trafficking, slavery, and all those sort of things. They are subscribing to like modern slavery fund, and the United Nations has exclusively created modern slavery fund for all these intervention that happens. Now again, there is this SDG 8.7, which exclusively talks about modern eradication of modern slavery and all. So if you can see, it's a very, very ideological space, where so many people with so many different ideology come together in work. Now, this is a top-down like model that I showcased. Now let's see how it looks like in bottom-up approach. Now I'll give you one example that would actually clarify so many things. So the ILO is basically towards the GATW side, towards the pro-sex work side, right? Now, what it does when it was implementing its large flagship project, which failed, it hired all NGOs who were supporting GATW. Now, of course, GATW has its internal network in Nepal of so many NGOs. ILO didn't hire any of those NGOs. It hired all NGOs who were working as, like GATW. So this shows that it really has nothing to do in ground. You see, in ground, things are much more complex. Like if you see in Nepal, after the earthquake, especially after the earthquake, so many people have given fund to counter trafficking, which happens during the post-disaster scenario. So many organizations have given fund to disaster risk, mitigation or disaster resilience or disaster rehabilitation. But what happens is majority, and there was this like, like small window for like, community awareness so that people do not migrate and not get into trafficking and all this sort of stuff. So this allowed many new organizations to feed into that particular funding stream. Like those organizations who have nothing to do with human trafficking. They have never worked on human trafficking. Now they are working suddenly on human trafficking. And those human trafficking organizations who only have worked on human trafficking, they have started working on disaster risk and all. So this is a very, very complicated phenomena that's happening, both like at geopolitical scale, at national scale. But when it enters into the ground, when it enters into the community, some community are like clever enough, they will allow them to enter just up to an extent, but some community are like really big no, they really do not allow things to happen. But the flow of funding is super, super interesting. And only like I know only 2 to 3 people who do research on this particular thing. Now, this flow of funding and this global narrative shapes government organizations' perception as well. Now, majority, so for example, Indian government, they are the signatories of Palermo Protocol. They have ratified it. So India is obligated towards that, right? At the same time, India is placed in tiers in the United Nations Trafficking in Persons report. Now, the government perception is also shaped by that because India do not need that much of fund from USAID, right? So India can afford to, like have a larger agenda of trafficking and whatever. But Nepal, on the other hand, it has not ratified Palermo Protocol. But since it's a highly funding dependent country, majority of the fund comes from USAID and all. So it has to make its anti-trafficking law in a way that it shapes the US agenda of human trafficking. So this geopolitics also shapes perception of government organizations, because I believe that sometimes they act as parrots and they are very, very they know the thing which is problematic, but at the same time, they have to subscribe to the narrative which the state is subscribing, and the state is subscribing the geopolitical narrative. But of course, different ideology and different, geopolitics, so many complicated thing happening in geopolitical scale, which also shapes the perception of, NGOs working on ground in so many diverse and different. Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It certainly captures the messiness of the situation. And I think there's a lot of work that we could do, need more critical insights of the kind that you're producing, because these comfortable positions that people take and the moralistic stances all need to be severely questioned. And you've begun doing that. So all power to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for the encouragement.
I don't see. Yeah, I think it's time as well. So, Ayushman, thank you very much. And I think further debates will carry on from here onwards. So those interested, you might get linked with them as well. And then thank you everyone in the forum as well who attended this. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.